My name is Nathan Cooper. I'm the MLA for the outstanding constituency of Olds, Didsbury, Three Hills. I'd like to now ask members joining us at the committee table to introduce themselves for the record, and then I will call upon members joining the meeting remotely to introduce themselves, beginning with the clerk on my right.
Good morning, Jody Rampel, Committee Clerk.
Joseph Scow, Carson Siksika, MLA.
Stefan Sabir, MLA, Calgary Bowler McCall.
Terry Cherkowicz, Law Clerk.
Lindsay Tisher, Human Resource Services, Legislative Assembly Office.
Darren Joy, Senior Financial Officer.
Ruth McHugh, Executive Director, Corporate Services.
Good morning, Shannon Dean, Clerk.
Member Sweet.
Good morning,
Member Billis.
Darren Billis, MLA, Edmonton Beverly, Clairview. Good morning.
Member Deol.
I thought I was muted. Good morning, everyone. Jasbir Deol, MLA for Edmonton Meadows.
Member Godfrey.
Richard Godfrey, MLA, Calgary Fish Creek, substituting for MLA Martin Long.
Member Newdorf.
Nathan Newdorf, MLA for Lethbridge East. Good morning, everyone.
Member Fry.
Michaela Fry, MLA Brooks Medicine Hat, substituting for Tracy Allard.
Member Williams. Member Williams, I understand that from time to time you are in the far reaches of the province. Oh, here we are.
Yes, it is a bad connection, Chair. Sorry about that. Go video off or call in if I have a difficult time with the Teams.
Excellent, thank you. Have I missed anyone? Excellent, thank you. Before we turn to the business at hand, a few operational items, and I would like to just note for the record that Member Godfrey is substituting for Member Long, Member Sweet for Member Goring, Member Billis for Member Dang, Member Rosen, who just joined.
Yes, sorry, Chair, I am here. I think I was just a minute late logging in. So Miranda Rosen is here from Banff Kananaskis.
Excellent, thank you, Member Rosen. Member Fry for Member Allard. I'd like to remind everyone of the current committee room protocols, which require that those attending the committee meeting...
Unknown participant is now joining.
Well, that's probably Williams. The members joining us in person are required to wear a mask at all times unless they're speaking, and that all attendees maintain appropriate distance between themselves and other members participating. Please note that the microphones are operated by Hansard. Committee proceedings are being live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Assembly Alberta TV. Members participating remotely should ensure that they are prepared to speak or vote when called upon, and whenever possible to have their cameras on when speaking, with the exception of Member Williams if his troubles persist. Please set your cell phones and other devices to silent for the duration of the meeting. I'd now like to move to the approval of the agenda. Are there any proposed additions or revisions to today's meeting agenda? If not, would a member please move adoption of our agenda? Member Scow to move adoption. Member Scow moved that the agenda for the January 26, 2022 meeting on the Special Standing Committee on Member Services be approved as distributed. All those in favor, or is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye in the room. Aye. Opposed in the room. On the phone, in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say no. Motion is carried and so ordered. Moving to agenda item number 3, the meeting minutes. The meeting minutes were distributed with your meeting package. Are there any amendments to the minutes from our last meeting? If not, would a member move a motion? Member Sabir has moved that the minutes of the December 14, 2021 meeting of the Special Standing Committee on member services be approved as distributed. Is there any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, I am prepared to call the question. All those in favor of the motion as proposed by Member Sabir in the room, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed in the room, please say aye. On the phone, any in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say no. Motion is carried and so ordered. Item number 4 on our agenda today is the 2022-23 Legislative Assembly Office Budget Estimates and the update on the strategic plan. On December 14th, 2021, the committee met and approved the budget parameters document to direct the Legislative Assembly Office to begin preparing the 2022-23 draft budget, presented today for the committee's recommendation and consideration. The budget parameters approved on December 14th outlined a budget increase of 5.15% to facilitate the required changes that were discussed and approved by the committee. Those changes were approximately 3% for operational requirements in information technology and broadcast services, parliamentary services, committees, and Mla Administration, and a 2% one-time funding for the Enterprise Resource Planning and Election Preparedness. The approved budget parameters document indicated that compensation for the LAO parallels Alberta's public service compensation for opted out and excluded employees. The LAO has since received notification that the Government of Alberta has lifted salary restraint measures for non-union employees under the Public Service Act. This means that effective April 1st, 2022, eligible Legislative Assembly Office employees who are not at the top of their salary range will receive salary adjustments. I would like to note that these adjustments are as a result of the Public Service Commissioner's change in policy in late last year. I'd like to turn this over to the clerk to have a bit more robust comments on how this policy change will affect the Legislative Assembly Office budget.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. Before I go into the impact of the lifting of the salary restraint, I'd just like to comment briefly on the operations of the LAO over the past year and looking forward to the 2022-23 fiscal year, which will be the 4th year in the life of the 30th Legislature. And as we close on the 2nd anniversary of the pandemic, I feel we've achieved considerable success this past year in dealing with challenges arising from the pandemic, whether that be remote voting in the chamber or hybrid committee proceedings, or just simply facilitating remote work. And this has all been achieved in a year with a very high level of committee activity and sessional hours. We've also embarked on a very ambitious ERP project. Some of the groundwork has been completed to date, and it will be an important feature of our strategic plan in the next year. Following my remarks, Ruth will provide the committee with an update on that work. Now, turning to the matter of the salary adjustments and the impact on the budget, I would first note that the overall impact on the consolidated 2022-23 budget is 3.85%. And these details are outlined in the addendum to the budget parameters document that's been provided in your meeting materials. As the Speaker noted, the committee in December approved a budget increase of 5.15% to facilitate certain operational requirements. The changes of that of 5.15% previously approved, plus the 3.85% subsequent salary compensation adjustments, result in a total change of 9%. Again, detailed explanations of these changes are found in the budget descriptions and highlights provided in the meeting materials. As the Speaker noted, the salary adjustments are consistent with what will be applied to the management and opted-out excluded employees of the Alberta Public Service. That is, 3% for eligible managers and 4% for eligible employees. This compensation adjustment impacts staff benefits, resulting in increased employer contributions to the health benefit and pension plans and premiums for CPP, EI, and WCB. This 3.85% adjustment is comprised of three elements. First, an adjustment that took effect December 1st, 4% for eligible staff, non-management, and 3% for eligible managers. Effective April 1st, 2022, 4% merit increase for non-management and 3% for eligible managers. And finally, January 2023, a 1.25% cost of living adjustment for everyone. This is a total of 9.25%, and with compounding impact, it reaches 9.5%. Now, in reviewing these compensation adjustments, I think it's important to focus on the three different employee categories within the LAO: branch staff, caucus staff, and constituency staff. For branch staff, rather than applying this full increase to branch budgets, we are recommending a modified rate of 6%, taking into account that only 50 to 60% of branch staff are eligible for each of the merit increases. The recommended 6% also includes employer contributions for benefits and the cost of living adjustment. For caucus budgets, we are recommending that the committee consider a 7% increase to accommodate the salary adjustments. This is calculated based on approximately 74% of caucus budgets being spent on labor. Now, historically, there's been a 70% labor utilization rate applied when calculating the budget impact of previous salary increases. We did look at the 3 previous fiscal years to see where the current labor utilization rate is at, and it averages at 71%, so we feel the 74% rate seems reasonable when considering recent history as well as actual costs. And I would also point out that while the intent of this caucus budget adjustment is to support compensation changes parallel to the rest of the public service, it is up to the individual caucus to manage as it sees fit. Final area of compensation adjustments relates to constituency staff. This employee group is eligible for adjustments as per their employment contracts. Accordingly, the recommended increase to the staffing component of the MSA budget funding formula is 9.5%. Assuming the committee is in agreement with that adjustment, there will be the need for considering an amendment to the constituency services order, which sets out the funding formula. Finally, there will be a $97,000 increase to Mla Admin that arises from increased costs to staff benefits related to the compensation adjustment. That concludes my high-level overview, Mr. Speaker. In closing, I wanted to extend my sincere thanks and appreciation to the tireless and dedicated professionals at the Legislative Assembly Office. We are happy to answer any questions you or the committee may have.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Dean. And I would also like to echo the committee's appreciation for the dedicated work that the Legislative Assembly staff have undertaken to ensure that the budget before us can be considered and members supported. So on behalf of all members, please pass along our thank you to them, as well as all the folks who aren't joining us today, but are also dedicated professionals in their own right. I would like to just make a couple of quick comments prior to moving to Ruth to have her discuss some points around the updated Legislative Assembly strategic business plan. And I'd just like to highlight a couple of things here. One in particular, that the Public Service Commissioner's order impacts Legislative Assembly staff, potentially caucus staff, and constituency staff, but there is no increase for MLA compensation. So those are two separate things, and so I wanted to just make sure that we are on the record identifying that none of these increases are extended to members of the Legislative Assembly. And then I would just like to re-highlight that the increase to caucus budgets is solely as a result of the increase that has been indicated by the Public Service Commissioner, and Shannon took some time to describe how we arrived at the percentage, and so it's important to know that that percentage is intended for labor purposes, but as with all caucus budgets, caucuses make respective decisions based upon the best way to spend those resources. So just wanted to highlight that and make sure that we were very clear. Having said those two things, I'd like to turn it over to Ruth for her to provide some comments and update us on the LAO strategic business plan. Please proceed.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I'm really happy to provide the committee with a brief progress report. We're more than halfway through the 2020 to 2023 strategic business plan, honoring tradition while embracing change. And I'm pleased to report that we've made great progress on the actions we've outlined for each one of our 5 strategic goals. I'm especially pleased to report this great progress since our plan was developed before we knew we'd be dealing with a global pandemic. It's fair to say that in these last 2 years, planned priorities have been disrupted in every organization. In my view, and echoing what Shannon said earlier, the LAO has done a remarkable job of reprioritizing and reallocating resources to deal with the pandemic and support our workforce in remote operations and continued top priority service for members. In reviewing our progress on all 5 of our strategic goals, much of what we had to do to achieve remote operations turned out to be well aligned with our strategic priorities. And we continue to adjust and learn as we go. We've proven that we are a determined and resilient organization. I don't want to take too much time in our meeting as we have a full agenda, but I thought the committee would be particularly interested in our progress on the ERP. You'll recall the ERP, or Enterprise Resource Planning Project, was approved last year to replace our decades-old legacy accounting, finance, payroll, and HR systems. We have now completed a successful RFP process based on comprehensive and robust needs analysis and business process mapping. The ERP project launched mid-December, and together with our selected vendor and led by our newly hired project manager, we have successfully activated the technical infrastructure, oriented the working group, and set out a detailed design and implementation schedule. We are currently in the discovery phase of data cleansing for export. The data will then be further analyzed in the design phase starting next month to ensure that we have a clean, robust system moving forward. We'll provide the committee with periodic ERP progress updates as significant milestones are achieved. The new ERP will impact our success in delivering our business goals and continuing to provide essential services to members. Our strategic business plan contains the guiding principles by which we make decisions to ensure the good work we do is truly helping to strengthen parliamentary democracy for all Albertans. Thank you so much for listening to our update.
Excellent. Thank you, Ruth. I'd now like to open the floor for discussion. I also have a suggested draft motion that a member that the Special Standing Committee on Member Services approve the 2022-23 Legislative Assembly of Alberta budget estimates in the amount of $71,858,000. I would love to entertain a motion of that nature, and then we can discuss that motion if there's anyone that's so inclined.
Quick question, Mr. Speaker.
Member Spear.
There were some clarifying questions, nothing serious, but I wanted to ask. So, will we do that before or after?
We can do it now, sure.
Yeah, I think then I can start now.
Go ahead.
First, I guess thank you to Shannon and Ruth for that presentation, and pleased to see this budget that supports LAO and members in carrying out their duties. And as was mentioned by Shannon, that IT has been critical over the last couple of years, and we were able to participate remotely in committee meetings and proceedings in the legislature. And certainly I would like to extend my thanks to all the hardworking staff that made that possible. And speaking of those IT upgrades, I was looking at the budget, and we have set aside a reasonable amount to upgrade that. So I think the question was around that We are also hearing about the incidents of ransomware and other cyber attacks, and that can render a system unusable and inaccessible. So does the IT department have an incident response plan that involves recovery or restoration if such an attack would occur? That's one question. And can you assure this committee that we would not be forced to pay a ransom if an attack occurred on the LAO?
Ruth.
Thank you. That is a really great question and certainly topical. So I can definitely speak to the focus on security and in particular cybersecurity. I sure wish I could give you assurance that the LAO would never be subject to a ransomware request. But of course, our best defense is a good offense. And the best way for ransomware attacks to happen is actually through the people. So a big part of our focus will be making sure that all of the human beings that are attached to our network, because they're a vulnerable source of malware or bad things getting into the system. So we're going to make a real concerted effort to ensure that everyone is well trained. But just before I tell you a little bit more about that, the funding that we have requested for IT, as you've noted, it's really to achieve four things: to replace obsolete equipment, as you mentioned, repair and upgrade our IT networks, cover the increased cost of mandatory user licensing, and to provide staff resources to maintain and secure the LAO's critical IT security and infrastructure. So that is a huge part of what we're going to be doing. And to deal with your question around do we have a good incident response program, we absolutely do. So the LAO has a business continuity plan that is actually managed through the Office of the Sergeant at Arms. And a part of that plan, a subset of the plan, is the disaster recovery program for IT incidents that is really under the purview of our Director of IT Operations and mine, of course. So yes, it is a good, robust plan. We have recently revisited it and will continue to do so. So I hope that answers your question, but I'm sure happy to.
Thank you.
Okay.
And does this IT budget include upgrades to networking and technology in the legislature?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So another just clarifying question. On page 5, there is a mention of a APF conference in the summer of 2022. Is that an in-person conference or is?
So at present, that conference is planned to be in person. Of course, decisions will be made over the following months with respect to whether or not an in-person conference can take place. The AEP conference moves around North America on a semi-rotating basis, and we are part of that rotation. And so that it is our opportunity and turn to host the AEP program. And so I look forward to being able to host. And quite frankly, I do hope that it's in person, but we'll have to follow the best advice of the public, the Chief Medical Health Officer at the time.
A couple of more questions.
Go ahead.
One is with respect to visitor services on page 13. So is there a plan for the resumption of visitor services, like tours, etc., in both the legislature and federal building?
Yeah. With respect to visitor services has done an incredible job of shifting to be able to reach as many Albertans as possible through online programming. Obviously, there's nothing that can replace experiencing our building in person, and so we are hoping that as there is an ease of restrictions and the public health emergency shifts, that we'll be able to get back to in-person tours and school at the Legislative Assembly and all of the programming that visitor services provide in person as quickly as possible. What I might just add, though, is we will continue to run a parallel type system of offering both in-person and online services, particularly because we have seen a significant increase in the amount of school-age children who have been able to access the program from outside of the capital region and really still have a really great experience. But traditionally, we have largely had Edmonton and capital region based schools attend school at the Legislature. So I'm pleased to see significantly more. In fact, there was a school at the Legislature from member Scow's riding in the past couple of months that I did a presentation for, where that just wouldn't have happened previously. So we will continue to run both sets of programming once we have tours and the building back open to the general public in a significantly more meaningful way.
And my last question is regarding Mla Administration and the MSA. The question I have is that the office operation component is, I take it, same for all offices. Is that correct?
Well, there's a formula based upon riding size, population. It's more complex than it needs to be, but it does take into a wide variety of factors, and so it's not exactly the same across all 87 ridings, but largely it's very similar.
Like, as you know, that the cost of real estate is not the same in all constituencies, and does then that formula accounts for that? And is there a plan for addressing possible uneven increases to the costs of real estate in some areas of the province? Like, for instance, in my riding on northeast side of the city, cost of renting is fairly higher, and it has gone up pretty much every year. So
at present, the committee hasn't undertaken a review of the formula. Of course, we're at that would be at our discretion. What it does take into place that while real estate might be more expensive in your area, in other areas like Member Scow's or Member Williams, there's often a need for multiple locations because of size and span of riding. So, no formula is perfect. It doesn't specifically take into consideration cost of real estate across the province. There are other things that the formula could be reviewed under. I think that the formula works pretty well. Like I say, it's not perfect, but it has worked well in the past. So if the committee desires to undertake some sort of review, I'm sure we can consider that in the future. But at this point in time, specifically to real estate, it does not consider the difference between Northeast and Southeast Calgary or otherwise. Any other questions?
thank you.
Member Scow?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to take a moment to thank the LEO for their presentation, their diligent work throughout the past 2 years as they have adapted to what I hope and pray is a temporary world that we had to live in. And also like to thank Member Sabir for his thoughtful questions. She raised a couple of issues that I had thought of as well, particularly about cybersecurity, when we have to address. And thank you, Ms. McHugh, for your response, particularly that of having the best defense is a good offense. If you get tired of this LAO thing, I think you have a good career ahead of you in sports coaching. But we would hate to lose you, so please stick around. But with that in mind, You know, I appreciate the presentations given and the recommendations from the Public Service Commissioner. And Mr. Speaker, you have a draft motion that I think, you know, on this side of the room that we would support, and I would support, at least as myself. So I'd like to potentially put my weight behind that motion in support of it.
Honorable members, the member Scow has moved that the Special Standing Committee on Member Services approve the 2022-23 Legislative Assembly of Alberta budget estimates in the amount of $71,858,000. Are there any other additional questions, comments, concerns, or does anyone else have input that they would like to add? Seeing and hearing none, I am prepared to call a question. Honourable members, on the motion as proposed by Member Scow, all those in favour of approving the 2022-23 budget estimates in the room, in favour, please say aye. Aye. In the room, opposed, please say no. On the phones, in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed, please say no. Motion is carried and so ordered, and I'd like to thank the committee for that. As mentioned in Ms. Dean's presentation or in Shannon's presentation, a motion is required to amend the constituency service orders. The motion, the draft motion, as I would propose, is as following: that the member moves that the Special Standing Committee on Member Services amend the constituency services order as following. A, in section 1.3 sub A sub 2, by striking out 88,324 and substituting 96,715, and B, by bringing the amendment referred in clause A into force April 1st, 2022. And this is no joking matter, or fooling matter, I guess, as it would be. Is there anyone in the committee that'd be willing to move such a motion as recommended by the clerk? Member Sabir, is there any additional questions, comments, concerns with respect to the motion as proposed by the Honourable Member Sabir? Seeing and hearing none, I am prepared to call a question. On the motion as proposed by Member Sabir, all those in favour in the room, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed in the room, please say no. All those in favour on the telephone, please say aye.
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 Any opposed online, please say no. Motion is carried and so ordered. This brings us to item number 5. Updates to the LAO Respectful Workplace Policy. I want to note that this update is for information purposes only, so there's no requirement for a vote, as this is a change, an update to a policy that is already existing, but I felt it necessary or important to bring you up to speed prior to making that adjustment. As noted in the briefing document, the Respectful Workplace Policy for the Legislative Assembly Office Employees, an attached guide, was established in October 2016. In 2019 and 2020, minor updates were made to the Legislative Assembly Office Policy and Guide. After receiving expert legal advice, the LAO updated both the Respectful Workplace Policy for the Legislative Assembly Office Employees and the related guide. These updates ensure that the document better align with the current version of the Respectful Workplace Policy for the Government of Alberta and the current requirements under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The updates have not changed the content in the LAO policy or the LAO guide that address complaints with members. Since the posting of the document last week, please note that a couple of minor housekeeping edits will be made to the document based on a few questions from caucus members or staff. These edits will be reflected in the final version of the document, and Ms. Tischer will provide a very brief summary of those edits, just so that the committee is aware and you don't necessarily have to go to search out what those minor errors or edits were. Lindsay.
Absolutely, thank you for that. The edits are, actually, one was a incorrect reference. We had referenced the Occupational Health and Safety Code on page 8, and it should actually be replaced with the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and that is in a reflection of certain legislative changes that are fairly recent. Despite having it proofed by many sets of eyes, Ms. Cherkowicz, my co-conspirator on creating this, we noticed that part of the definition of workplace violence on page 8 had actually been cut off in the most recent version. So it currently is not complete. It currently does not include domestic and sexual violence, and that was just a typo. So we have inserted that, reinserted that. Page 13, there was a, excuse me, a question and answer section that starts on page 12, carries over onto page 13, and in consultation with the opposition caucus, it was found that the question around how joking can be considered inappropriate was no longer found material to supporting the policy and the guide itself, so we have taken that out.
Excellent. Thank you, Lindsay. I'd like to also thank those who provided feedback on the document and spent additional time finding small errors and otherwise, and so that we can have the most up-to-date document as possible. As I mentioned, this is for information purposes only, so we don't require a motion, but if there is any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them briefly now. Member Sabir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we appreciate the update to this policy, and thank you for those clarification. One more, I guess, question of clarification on page 5, I believe. And the sexual harassment, it says sexual harassment will not be tolerated and is considered a serious breach of this policy. So I just noticed that the word serious breach is only used here. And when we are talking about consequences for breach, like, this is not mentioned separately that if there are more serious consequences for a serious breach. So I wonder if you would comment on that.
Lindsay or Terry?
We actually, the serious breach reference is made under sexual harassment, workplace harassment, and workplace violence, and it's also captured in the retaliation component. So that was emphatic language that was suggested based on the review done in December 2021.
In consequences section, like it just mentioned consequences for breach. Like, I don't see a section there which lists
Right.
the consequences for a serious breach.
So if there were a complaint raised and going through the procedures, the processes for a complaint, we would be looking at what sort of mediation techniques or solutions would be fitting of the breach itself. These areas are considered serious breaches, and that's why we're using the emphatic language. Terry, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add, Member Sabir, is effectively when a complaint comes forward, it's going to be assessed on its facts. And essentially, based on that assessment by the employer, which would be the LAO, they will then have to look at the different types of consequences that can be applied to that complaint. It will be in the discretion of the employer on viewing, objectively the facts as to determine what kind of degree of seriousness applies to that case. So the way the policy is written, and it does reflect the policy for the GOA, is there's discretion to the employer to assess the degree of seriousness to each of the independent cases that come forward. As Lindsay had noted, the use of the term serious breach is emphatic language that was suggested to us by our outside counsel in terms of making sure it's in here to be very clear that any of these types of conduct are seen by the employer as serious in nature.
Member Godfrey.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank the LAO and Lindsay for their great work on this. We all know, I think there's greater awareness over the last decade or so on workplace, respectful workplaces and harassment and other factors that really very much are detrimental to the workplace, to committee work, to whatever roles we're in. So I just wanted to commend them for this advancement of this work, for continuing to fine tune it, and for the collaboration with other parties that allow us the opportunity to really increase awareness and the empowerment of employees in regard to this issue. So just wanted to thank them very much for that.
Are there others? Thank you, members, for this, and I also would like to thank the LAO as well as our outside counsel who has provided some great feedback in making sure that the policy is as up to date as possible. Is there any other items of business for discussion? Seeing and hearing none, the next meeting will be at the call of the chair. I anticipate that it's quite likely that we will have occasion to meet once during session, but we'll see how the agenda may or may not come together on that. With that said, I'd like to have a motion to adjourn. Member Scow, all those in favor of the motion as proposed by Member Scow to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
On the phones, aye.
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 Opposed on the phones? In the room opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Thanks so much for your attendance. Have a great day. Remember to be kind to your neighbor.